The moment a threat becomes irreversible is never loud at first. It doesn't announce itself. It slips in quietly, disguised as bravado, as frustration, as someone trying to feel powerful for a few seconds longer. It starts with words that should have stayed inside someone's head. A shove that didn't need to happen. A hand moving where it had no reason to go. Most people think the line is crossed when the gun appears. They're wrong. The line is crossed earlier, long before metal meets skin. Threats feel reversible when you're the one making them. You tell yourself it's just pressure, just intimidation. You're not really going to pull the trigger. You just want control. You want the other person to shrink, to apologize, to break. That illusion lasts right up until the moment it doesn't. Right up until the threat leaves the realm of talk and enters the realm of physics, where distance, reaction time, and instinct take over. When a Glock is raised, the air changes. Not dramatically, not like in movies. It gets tighter, quieter. Time doesn't slow down, but attention sharpens. Every detail locks into place. The weight of the weapon, the angle of the wrist, the pressure of a finger resting too close to where it shouldn't be. This is the point of no return, even if the person holding the gun doesn't know it yet. Because a threat stops being a message the moment it creates a reaction you can't control. For most people, fear floods in. Heart rate spikes. Thoughts scatter. The body freezes or panics. That's what the person with the gun is counting on. They're betting everything on fear doing the work for them. But they've already made a fatal assumption. They've assumed the person in front of them responds like everyone else. Some people don't. There are individuals whose nervous systems are wired differently, not by chance, but by years of repetition under stress. People trained to operate when adrenaline hits, when their pulse is hammering, when consequences are immediate. For them, the moment a gun is pressed to their face isn't chaos. It's clarity. The noise drops out. The world narrows. Options sort themselves without emotion attached. And that's where the threat becomes irreversible. Because now it's no longer about what the person with the gun wants. It's about what they've triggered. You can't threaten someone like that and expect the situation to stay frozen. Biology doesn't work that way. Training doesn't work that way. Once the body switches into survival mode, it follows a script written long before this moment. The person holding the weapon may still think they're negotiating. They may still believe they're scaring someone into compliance. But the balance has already shifted. They've introduced lethal force into a space where it didn't belong, and that decision removes all soft outcomes from the table. Even pulling the gun back doesn't undo it. Even saying, "I didn't mean it," doesn't rewind time. The threat has been made real. Trust is gone. Distance is gone. Safety is gone. What's left is a narrow window where instinct and training decide what happens next. This is the part people don't like to talk about. We prefer to believe every situation has a pause button, that there's always time to rethink. But the truth is, once you escalate to lethal threat, you hand control to forces you don't understand. You gamble that the person in front of you will choose restraint, even as you've offered none. And if that person has spent years learning how to survive violence, how to neutralize it, how to end it quickly when necessary, then your threat isn't a warning. It's a signal, a starting gun. From the outside, it may look like nothing has changed. Two people standing close. One weapon. No movement. But inside that moment, everything is already in motion. Calculations are being made. Angles assessed. Outcomes weighed without hesitation or anger. The person with the Glock thinks the danger lies in whether they pull the trigger. They don't realize the danger began the second they decided to raise it, the second they assumed fear would do the rest, the second they failed to recognize that some people don't hear threats as threats at all, but as confirmation that the situation has moved into a space where survival takes precedence over everything else, where the body responds before the mind has time to argue, where irreversible doesn't mean death yet, but it means there's no clean way back to the moment before the gun came up and everything became about what happens in the next heartbeat, the next breath, the next shift of weight, the next decision made without permission or warning. False power is loud. It announces itself. It needs witnesses. It needs reactions. It feeds on the belief that fear equals respect and that the ability to threaten is the same as the ability to control. False power shows up fast and burns hot, but it has no patience and no depth. It mistakes aggression for authority and volume for strength. The moment it feels challenged, it escalates, because escalation is the only language it knows. Real discipline looks nothing like that. Real discipline is quiet. It doesn't rush to prove anything. It doesn't posture or seek validation. It exists long before the moment of conflict and remains long after. It's built in repetition no one sees, in rules followed when no one is watching, in restraint practiced daily, so it's available under pressure. Where false power relies on intimidation, real discipline relies on control, especially self-control. The person holding a gun often believes they hold power simply because they can end a life. That belief is fragile. It depends entirely on compliance. The second the other person stops playing their role, false power collapses. It has no backup plan beyond more noise, more threats, more force. That's why it's so dangerous and so weak at the same time. Real discipline doesn't need a weapon to feel powerful. It understands exactly what a weapon means. It understands consequences, timing, and limits. Someone with discipline doesn't reach for dominance as a first move. They avoid unnecessary confrontation because they don't confuse avoidance with weakness. They know the difference between walking away and backing down. False power sees walking away as losing. That's the divide. A disciplined person has already tested themselves. They've been afraid before. They've been exhausted, overwhelmed, pushed past comfort. They've learned what their body does under stress and how to keep functioning anyway. They don't guess how they'll react. They know. That knowledge removes panic. It removes the need to prove anything in the moment. False power is improvising. It's emotional. It's reactive. It feels strong only as long as nothing goes wrong. The second something unexpected happens, it spirals. That's why false power reaches for the fastest, most extreme tool available. It has no patience for complexity. It wants instant results. Discipline accepts delay. Discipline accepts discomfort. Discipline accepts that control doesn't always look dramatic. When a threat is made, false power expects submission. Real discipline prepares for reality. It reads posture, breathing, tone, distance. It notices what others miss because it isn't distracted by ego. It doesn't underestimate, and it doesn't overestimate. It simply assesses. False power believes fear will freeze the other person. Discipline knows fear can sharpen focus. False power assumes authority because it's holding something dangerous. Discipline understands danger doesn't grant authority, it demands responsibility. One seeks dominance. The other seeks resolution, or failing that, survival. This is why people misunderstand strength. They expect it to look angry. They expect it to look aggressive. They expect it to fill space. But real discipline often looks calm to the point of being unsettling. No shaking hands. No raised voice. No unnecessary movement. Just presence. And presence is something false power can't fake for long. False power burns energy fast. It leaks emotion. It needs constant reinforcement. Discipline conserves energy. It waits. It doesn't need to escalate because escalation isn't its goal. Control is. Control of self first, then situation if required. The difference shows most clearly when things don't go according to plan. When fear doesn't land. When the other person doesn't flinch. When silence replaces panic. False power panics at that point. It doubles down. It pushes harder, faster, sloppier. Discipline doesn't rush. It understands that every action narrows options. That once certain lines are crossed, outcomes multiply in ways you can't predict. Discipline respects that reality. False power ignores it. People drawn to false power often believe discipline is passive. They mistake restraint for hesitation. They don't see the preparation underneath. They don't see the countless moments where discipline chose not to react, not because it couldn't, but because it didn't need to. And that misunderstanding is where false power makes its biggest mistake. Because discipline doesn't announce itself. It doesn't warn. It doesn't posture. It waits until there's no other option, until the situation demands action, until control can no longer be maintained through presence alone. And when it moves with purpose, not anger, not fear, not ego, but clarity shaped by experience, training, and an understanding that power isn't about making someone else feel small. It's about knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of when the moment no longer allows for pretending. Silence is often misunderstood. People associate danger with shouting, with threats spoken out loud, with chaos filling the space. But silence is what comes right before things change. It's the pause where decisions are made. It's the absence of noise that signals something has shifted beneath the surface. When a confrontation turns quiet, it doesn't mean the threat is gone. It usually means the situation has sharpened. Words stop because words are no longer useful. The mind stops arguing and starts choosing. That's when silence stops being passive and becomes active. Most people fill silence because it makes them uncomfortable. They talk to reassure themselves. They raise their voice to regain control. They keep explaining, threatening, negotiating, because as long as sound exists, they believe the moment is still flexible. Silence removes that comfort. It forces reality to take shape. In tense situations, silence often arrives after someone realizes fear didn't land the way they expected. They expected crying, begging, apologies. Instead, they're met with stillness. No argument. No visible panic. Just a steady presence that doesn't match the script in their head. That's when silence becomes a warning sign. A person who goes quiet under threat may not be processing fear. They may be focusing. They may be calculating distance, timing, angles, exits. Their body may be slowing down instead of speeding up. Breathing steadies. Muscles loosen, not to relax, but to respond faster. Silence is where intention replaces emotion. There's a difference between being speechless and being silent. Being speechless is overwhelm. Silence is control. And control, in moments of danger, is unsettling to someone relying on intimidation. It removes the feedback they depend on. They no longer know if they're winning. That uncertainty breeds mistakes. People who use threats expect reactions. They need confirmation that their power is working. Silence gives them none. It feels like resistance without confrontation. It forces them to guess, and guessing under stress leads to bad decisions. Silence also changes how time feels. The person making noise feels rushed. They feel the pressure to act, to escalate, to force a conclusion. The silent person feels time widen. Each second becomes usable. Each breath becomes deliberate. This is why experienced professionals often go quiet under pressure. Not because they're afraid, but because noise wastes energy. Words commit you to narratives you may not want. Silence keeps options open. It allows observation without exposure. In high-risk training environments, silence is taught as a tool. You learn when not to speak. When speaking gives away more than it gains. When silence forces the other person to reveal themselves. Their impatience, their lack of control, their emotional leakage. Someone who is truly in command doesn't need to fill space. They let space work for them. Silence can also signal acceptance of reality. Not surrender, but clarity. The moment when someone understands exactly where they are and what may need to happen next. There's no panic in that acceptance. Just readiness. This is why silence feels heavy. It carries weight. It makes people uneasy because it removes the illusion that everything is still being negotiated. Silence suggests the negotiation phase may be over. In confrontations involving weapons, silence becomes even more pronounced. The stakes eliminate small talk. Every sound feels amplified. A breath, a shift of weight. The absence of speech becomes louder than shouting. The person who goes silent isn't necessarily thinking about winning. They're thinking about surviving, about minimizing harm, about what comes next if the situation collapses. Silence allows that thinking to happen cleanly. Those unfamiliar with this dynamic often misread it. They assume silence means fear has taken hold. They mistake stillness for weakness. That misinterpretation is dangerous, because silence can mean the mind has stopped reacting and started acting. It can mean the body is preparing to move efficiently rather than emotionally. It can mean the individual has accepted that escalation has already occurred and is now operating within that reality rather than wishing it away. Silence also strips away performance. There's no audience in silence. No validation. No applause. Just outcome. That's why people who rely on intimidation hate it. Silence denies them the drama they crave. And once silence settles in, it tends to stay until something irreversible breaks it. Not a speech, not a threat, an action. That's why seasoned professionals pay attention when a room goes quiet. They recognize it as a signal, not a void. A sign that the emotional phase has ended and the decisive phase has begun. A warning that whatever happens next won't be driven by noise or ego, but by preparation, instinct, and a clear understanding that the moment has crossed into territory where words no longer shape the outcome and silence is no longer absence. But intent waiting for release. Training doesn't announce itself when it shows up. It doesn't come with a checklist or a reminder. It lives beneath conscious thought, waiting for the moment when thinking becomes a liability. Most people imagine training as something you switch on when needed, like flipping a mental lever. The reality is the opposite. Real training never switches off, because the moment you have to remember it, it's already too late. Under pressure, the body defaults to its most practiced patterns. Not its best intentions, not its strongest opinions. Its habits. That's why training matters more than talent or courage. In high-stress situations, bravery without preparation collapses quickly. Training holds shape when everything else distorts. People who haven't been tested often believe they'll rise to the occasion. They picture themselves making the right choice when it counts. That belief is comforting, but it's rarely accurate. You don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your level of training. And that fall happens fast, without debate. When adrenaline hits, fine motor skills degrade. Vision narrows. Hearing distorts. Memory fragments. This isn't a failure. It's biology. Training accounts for that reality. It doesn't demand perfection. It builds simplicity. Repetition replaces complexity, so action remains possible when cognition falters. This is why real training looks boring from the outside. It's repetition without applause. Drills that seem excessive. Scenarios rehearsed until they feel automatic. The goal isn't excitement. It's reliability. It's making sure the body knows what to do when the mind is busy surviving. Training that never switches off shows itself in small ways. In posture that stays balanced without thought. In hands that know where to go. In breathing that steadies under pressure instead of spiraling. These aren't conscious choices. They're conditioned responses. Someone without training reacts to danger. Someone with training responds. Reaction is emotional and immediate. Response is measured and efficient. That difference often determines who controls the moment. Training also teaches restraint. Contrary to popular belief, it doesn't create aggression. It creates selectivity. It teaches when not to act as much as when to act. This is critical because untrained individuals often escalate situations out of fear, mistaking action for control. Those who are trained understand that unnecessary movement creates risk. Unnecessary words create confusion. Unnecessary force creates consequences. Training filters out waste. Another aspect people overlook is that training builds familiarity with stress. The body learns that adrenaline doesn't mean panic. It means information. Heart rate increases. Breathing changes. Focus narrows. Instead of fighting those sensations, training works with them. This familiarity prevents shock. The first time someone feels real threat, the sensations can be overwhelming. Training introduces those sensations gradually, repeatedly, until they lose their power to derail action. What feels unbearable to one person feels manageable to another, not because of toughness, but because of exposure. Training also embeds decision-making frameworks. Not rigid scripts, but principles. Distance matters. Angles matter. Timing matters. These principles guide action without requiring conscious calculation. They surface automatically when needed. This is why training doesn't disappear under stress. It becomes more visible. The more intense the moment, the more the body leans on what it knows. In that sense, training is always present, quietly shaping behavior even when no threat exists. It shows in how someone moves through space, how they notice exits, how they position themselves without thinking. These habits aren't paranoia. They're preparedness. They cost nothing and demand nothing, but they're there when required. Training that never switches off also means accountability never switches off. Those who are trained understand the weight of their actions. They know what force can do. They know what cannot be undone. That knowledge breeds caution, not recklessness. Untrained individuals may fantasize about violence. Trained individuals tend to avoid it. They've seen enough outcomes to respect the cost. Their training doesn't make them eager to act. It makes them precise. When a situation turns dangerous, there's no internal debate about what comes next. There's no scramble to remember techniques. The body aligns itself with purpose. Movement becomes economical. Attention sharpens. That's when training reveals its true value, not as a collection of skills, but as a state of readiness that exists even in calm moments. A baseline of competence that doesn't spike or fade. It's always there, shaping behavior quietly, ensuring that if the moment demands action, the response will be grounded in repetition rather than impulse, in discipline rather than panic, in preparation rather than hope. Because training that truly matters is not something you activate. It's something you live with continuously. Something woven so deeply into behavior that even when the world narrows to a single breath and a single choice, the body already knows how to move. Intimidation is supposed to end a situation quickly. That's the promise it makes to the person using it. Apply enough fear, and the other person will fold. Say the right words. Show the right weapon. Raise your voice. Create pressure. The problem is intimidation only works on people who believe they have no other options. The moment it meets someone who does, it starts to unravel. Backfiring doesn't happen all at once. It starts subtly. The threat doesn't land the way it was meant to. The reaction is delayed or missing. The posture doesn't collapse. The eyes don't dart away. Instead of fear, there's stillness. Instead of panic, there's assessment. This is the first crack in the illusion of control. People who rely on intimidation rarely notice that moment. They're focused on their own performance. They expect escalation to produce submission, so when it doesn't, they escalate again. Louder, closer, more force. Each step feels logical to them, but each step narrows their exit. Intimidation thrives on asymmetry. One person feels powerful, the other feels trapped. When that imbalance disappears, intimidation loses its leverage. The person being threatened no longer feels smaller. They may still feel danger, but danger isn't the same as helplessness. This is where intimidation begins to work against its user. As the threat intensifies, the body of the threatened person often does something unexpected. Instead of freezing, it stabilizes. Breathing slows. Attention sharpens. The threat provides clarity rather than chaos. Intimidation was meant to overwhelm, but instead it organizes. The person issuing the threat starts to feel the shift. They may not consciously recognize it, but they sense resistance. Not verbal resistance, psychological resistance. The kind that doesn't argue back, but doesn't comply either. That unsettles them. Intimidation needs feedback. It needs visible fear. Without it, the person using it begins to doubt. Doubt leads to overcompensation. Movements become exaggerated. Tone becomes harsher. Decisions become rushed. The threat grows sloppier. Meanwhile, the person being intimidated gains information with every second. They observe patterns. They notice inconsistencies. They sense desperation beneath the aggression. Intimidation reveals more than it hides. This reversal is why intimidation is such a risky tool. It gives away intent. It commits the user to a path that's hard to step off. Once you've tried to scare someone into submission, walking it back looks like weakness. So the only option feels like forward motion, even when forward is dangerous. When intimidation backfires, the power dynamic flips quietly. The person who initiated the threat becomes reactive. They're no longer controlling the situation. They're responding to it. The person they meant to dominate now dictates the emotional tempo. This shift doesn't require violence. It doesn't require words. It happens internally. One person realizes the threat isn't working. The other realizes they're not as trapped as they were meant to feel. From that point on, intimidation accelerates toward its own failure. In high-stress encounters, intimidation often triggers trained responses. Instead of compliance, it activates survival protocols. The threatened individual may stop listening entirely, not out of defiance, but because their brain has shifted from social interaction to threat resolution. At that stage, additional threats are irrelevant. The damage is already done. The intimidation has fulfilled the opposite of its purpose. People who rely on intimidation believe they're creating control through fear. What they're often doing is forcing a binary outcome. Either the other person submits completely, or the situation escalates beyond their control. There's no middle ground. That's why intimidation works best on the unprepared and fails most spectacularly on the disciplined. Disciplined individuals don't need to win the psychological battle. They just need to survive it. They don't engage with the threat on its terms. Once intimidation backfires, the person using it may try to regain dominance through speed. They rush decisions. They skip steps. They act before thinking. This urgency increases mistakes. Mistakes increase vulnerability. The irony is that intimidation feels strongest right before it collapses. That's when it's loudest, closest, most aggressive. From the outside, it may look like the person issuing the threat is in control. Internally, they're losing it. The person being intimidated senses this. Not consciously, but instinctively. Humans are wired to read instability. The threat stops feeling absolute. It starts feeling desperate. This is the moment intimidation turns into a liability. Instead of freezing the situation, it accelerates it. Instead of discouraging action, it invites it. Instead of projecting strength, it exposes weakness. Intimidation backfires because it assumes fear is a dead end. It isn't. Fear can lead to compliance, but it can also lead to clarity, resolve, and decisive action. The person who chooses intimidation is betting everything on one outcome, and when that bet fails, they've already burned every other option, leaving themselves exposed to the consequences of forcing a situation that never needed to be forced in the first place. Last words are usually imagined as something dramatic. A final sentence, a closing statement, a chance to explain, apologize, or sound brave. People think of them as something spoken out loud, something meant to be heard. But in real moments of danger, last words are rarely verbal. They're decisions. They're thoughts that surface when time collapses and the future narrows to a few seconds. The true meaning of last words has less to do with speech and more to do with awareness. It's the instant someone realizes that whatever happens next can't be undone, that the situation has moved past posturing and into consequence. Last words live in that realization, whether anyone speaks or not. For the person being threatened, last words are often internal. A rapid inventory of what matters. Family, duty, survival. The understanding that pleading won't help, that explanations won't land, that the moment doesn't care about fairness. There's no poetry in it. Just clarity. Just acceptance of reality as it is, not as it should be. For the person making the threat, last words often arrive too late. They come as a flash of doubt. A split-second question. Is this really happening? Is this worth it? That thought doesn't stop the situation. It just marks the moment they realize they've crossed into territory where control no longer belongs to them. Last words aren't always regrets. Sometimes they're confirmations. The silent acknowledgement that every warning was ignored. Every chance to disengage was passed. Every step toward escalation was taken willingly. In that sense, last words aren't tragic. They're honest. People like to believe last words are about closure. In reality, they're about exposure. They strip away performance and reveal who someone is when there's nothing left to hide behind. Titles don't matter. Stories don't matter. Intentions don't matter. Only action and consequence remain. In high-stakes moments, the mind doesn't craft speeches. It reduces. It distills. Thoughts become simple. Do I move? Do I wait? Do I act? Do I survive? Last words exist in those choices, not in sentences meant for an audience. There's also a difference between last words and final thoughts. Final thoughts can be reflective. Last words are immediate. They don't look backward. They lock onto the present. They're grounded in the body rather than the imagination. Breath, balance, distance, timing. This is why the phrase, "any last words," is often misunderstood. It sounds like a chance for drama, but it's really a declaration that the moment has reached a threshold. It's not an invitation. It's a signal that the next action will define everything that follows. For trained individuals, last words don't inspire panic. They trigger focus. The mind doesn't race. It narrows. There's no bargaining with fate, no internal monologue filled with fear. Just alignment between intent and action. Last words don't echo. They vanish the moment the body moves. For untrained individuals, last words can feel surreal. Time feels distorted. Thoughts scatter. The gravity of the situation arrives all at once. What was once a bluff now feels permanent. What was once noise now feels like silence closing in. The true meaning of last words is that they rarely belong to the person who speaks them. They belong to the moment, to the choices made before anyone thought about saying anything, long before the threat, long before the weapon, long before the situation hardened into something that could no longer be softened. Last words are shaped by every decision leading up to them, every escalation, every refusal to step back, every assumption that the other person would flinch first. By the time someone asks for them, the outcome is often already set in motion. That's the uncomfortable truth. Last words don't change fate. They reveal it. They show whether someone understands the cost of the moment they're in, whether they recognize the gravity of what they've done or what they're about to do, whether they still believe this is a performance or finally understand it's real. In the end, last words aren't about what you say when everything is about to end. They're about what you chose when there was still time to choose differently, about whether you recognized the warning signs, respected the boundaries, understood the difference between power and consequence, and realized that some moments don't offer a closing line, only a final action that speaks louder than anything you could ever say.